Hello everyone and welcome back to the Windy City Politics and History channel. In today's video we are going to be taking another look at the 2024 gubernatorial elections. So 2024 is a presidential election year, and 9 of the 11 states that hold gubernatorial elections in 2024 will always have them in the presidential election year. Vermont and New Hampshire have them every 2 years, and the other 9 have them every 4 years, always in a presidential election year. And let's start taking a look at the safe Republican states. So the state of North Dakota is going to be safe Republican. The state of Utah is going to be safe Republican. The state of West Virginia is going to be safe Republican. And West Virginia used to have a long line of Democratic governors until Jim Justice was elected in 2016. He was actually elected as a Democrat and then switched parties. He switched to the Republican Party in 2017 and was reelected as a Republican in 2020. And now looking at 2024, he is term limited. There's rumors that he's going to run for Senate against incumbent Democratic Senator Joe Manchin. By the way, check out my 2024 Senate prediction video if you have not already. If you have, I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching it. And he's term limited. Jim Justice is term limited. So the most prominent Republican as of now to jump into the race, I'd say, is Patrick Morrisey, the Attorney General of West Virginia. He is a statewide office holder, and also Moore Capito, who I believe is a state delegate, and he is the son of Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito. So, and therefore the grandson of former Republican Governor Arch A. Moore, whose daughter is Shelley Moore Capito. So those are the two most prominent Republicans. However, Patrick Morrisey has somewhat of an advantage because he is a statewide office holder. He has probably a little bit more name recognition, though, because Moore Capito is the grandson of a former governor and the son of a current senator, he probably has decent recognition as well. But as of right now, regardless of who wins that primary, whether it's Patrick Morrisey, Moore Capito, or someone else, it's going to be safe Republican. And then Vermont is also going to be safe Republican. And I know that sounds weird. On the presidential level, Vermont is usually safe Democratic. On the Senate level, Vermont is safe Democratic. On the House level, Vermont is safe Democratic. However, Phil Scott is a liberal Republican, a moderate Republican, and he has been reelected without issue in Vermont the past several election cycles. As I said, Vermont has its gubernatorial elections every 2 years. And if Phil Scott runs, Vermont is safe Republican. If Phil Scott does not run, then I would say Vermont is pretty much safe Democratic, maybe likely Democratic. And now moving on to the safe Democratic states, and there's one in this category, and that is the state of Delaware. Incumbent Governor John Carney is term limited and cannot seek another term, but Vermont is going to be safe Democratic. And now moving on to the likely states that will not necessarily be competitive. And there are 2 in this category for the Republicans and 1 in this category for the Democrats. In the state of Indiana, incumbent Governor Republican Eric Holcomb is term limited and cannot seek another term. He was elected in 2016 and reelected in 2020. And now looking at 2024, Republican Senator Mike Braun is retiring from the Senate to run for governor in 2024. I believe he will win, but I don't believe it will be by 15 points. So for that reason, Indiana is likely, but I have no doubts that Mike Braun will win, or a Republican will win the gubernatorial election in Indiana. And the same is true for Missouri. It's likely Republican. Once again, Missouri used to have a history of Democratic governors. Then Eric Greitens was elected in 2016, resigned in, I want to say 2019. I want to say it was 2019 when he resigned. And then Mike Parson took over, and he is the current governor of Missouri. He was reelected in 2020. I believe he is term limited, though I'm not completely sure. But regardless, I believe a Republican will win this governorship. and I don't believe it will be by 15 points, but I don't really have a doubt that a Republican will win. I just think it'll be by around 13 points. And then moving on to the likely Democratic state that is likely Democrat, but not really that competitive, and that is Washington. And incumbent Governor Jay Inslee, I believe, has declared he is seeking a third term, and personally, I think he's going to win re-election. He won by around 13 points in 2020, and I believe he'll win by a similar margin in 2024. So he underperformed Joe Biden a little bit in the state, but I think he'll still win by a pretty comfortable margin, probably by around 13 points. And now moving on to the likely states that actually could be somewhat competitive, where both parties could be somewhat in play, and that's Montana and New Hampshire. So in Montana, incumbent Governor Greg Gianforte, a Republican, was first elected in 2020, and once again, Montana is another state that is Republican at the national level, but has had a history of electing Democratic governors. And incumbent Governor Greg Gianforte, a Republican, most likely will seek a second term. And once again, it's one of those states where it's not going to be 15 points in favor of the Republicans, but it's probably going to go Republican. But this one I could see a potential upset, especially with John Tester, the Democratic senator, on the ballot for the Senate race. You could potentially see him help with Democratic turnout in the state and potentially make this race more competitive. Although personally I think that Greg Gianforte, or if he decides to retire, another Republican will win here by around 8 points. And then New Hampshire I'm categorizing as likely Republican. Incumbent Governor Chris Sununu, a Republican, won re-election by around 16 points in 2022 after winning re-election by around, I want to say 30 points in 2020. So he significantly underperformed expectations in 2022. And for that reason, I'm categorizing New Hampshire as likely Republican. Now, if Chris Sununu decides to retire and run for president, which there is speculation that that could happen, I personally think that this could go down to lean Republican, tilt Republican, or end up in the Democratic column. However, if Chris Sununu does run, I believe this will be likely Republican. I believe it will be competitive, but on the same note, I don't think that the Democrats have very good chances here if Chris Sununu is the Republican nominee. Now, if it's someone else, the Democrats could potentially flip this. Even if it's Chris Sununu, they still have a chance, but for right now, it is likely Republican. And then the last state, which is the marquee gubernatorial race in 2024, without a doubt, the race in 2024 that is going to be the most focused on by both parties, the state that is going to be the most heavily targeted by both parties, by both governors' associations, and that is the state of North Carolina. Incumbent Democratic Governor Roy Cooper was first elected in 2016, defeating then-Governor Republican Pat McCrory by under a percentage point. Roy Cooper was re-elected in 2020 by around 4 percentage points, at the same time that Donald Trump, a Republican, carried the state on the presidential level by around a point. So that shows that Roy Cooper has crossover support, has support from Republicans. However, Roy Cooper is also term limited, so he cannot seek a third term. The Democratic frontrunner for the nomination is current Attorney General Josh Stein, and the Republican frontrunner for the nomination is Mark Robinson. I believe he is the current lieutenant governor. And looking at the polling, and this is the only state for 2024 for the gubernatorial election where there is polling, and you see in May of 2022, Mark Robinson was up by 6 points. And then in October 2022, in a poll conducted by Public Policy Polling, sponsored by Carolina Forward, which is Democratic-leaning, Josh Stein is up by 2. And then in a Republican-leaning poll, Mark Robinson is up by 1. In that first poll in 2022, in May of 2022, that was a Republican-leaning poll. And then in the same Democratic-leaning poll with a higher proportion of voters, higher sample size, larger sample size that is, in March of 2023, Mark Robinson is up by 2. So it went from Josh Stein being up by 2 to Mark Robinson being up by 2 in that same polling network, in that same poll that was conducted by the same group, same sponsor. So that shows that the gubernatorial race there is trending in the Republicans' direction. And for that reason, I'm going to categorize North Carolina as lean Republican for the time being. I believe this could be a potential Democratic hold, especially if Joe Biden ends up carrying the state, or the Democratic nominee ends up carrying the state at the presidential level. However, as we saw in 2016 and 2020, it doesn't necessarily matter which party carries the state at the presidential level. The gubernatorial results are different. There are people willing to split their tickets between president and governor in North Carolina. So all in all, the Republicans, as of right now, flip the state of North Carolina, and that is going to be the most competitive gubernatorial race in the 2024 cycle. And other than that, all the other governorships are held by their respective parties. I hope you all have a great day. Please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.